overcoming inequality and to serving our veterans. So I want to introduce Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Neil. This is my wife, Jane. I think everybody knows. Thank you. Thank you all for inviting me to say a few words to you. As many of you may know, we began our campaign for the presidency about 9 months ago. And when we began our campaign on a beautiful day in Burlington, Vermont, there were a lot of media pundits who were commenting on my hair, on my attire, but the truth is that not too many of them thought that we had much of a chance to do well. A lot has changed in the last 9 months. And I think the reason for that is that we are discussing issues that, for a variety of reasons, are not often discussed in our country. And I think what we are tapping into is a feeling of ordinary Americans that there is something profoundly wrong with a government that seems every day to be deeply concerned about the interest of the wealthy and the powerful, but somehow ignores working people and the middle class and pays virtually no attention at all to poverty. So I think the success of our campaign is talking truth in a straightforward way to the American people and understanding that no president, not Bernie Sanders or anybody else, can bring about the changes that we need in this country alone. That what needs to happen is that we need what I call a political revolution, which means that millions of people who today have given up on the political process, people who do not believe their vote matters, people who do not pay attention to what goes on, often because they don't get the information they need to even make decent judgments, because media, to a significant degree, sees politics as a football game or as a soap opera rather than a discussion of the real issues facing our country. So maybe I'm an old-fashioned New Englander, but I kind of look at politics in a democracy as not very different than going to a doctor's office. If you're not feeling well, you go to the doctor's office, you say, "Doc, what's wrong with me? What's the diagnosis? And how do I get better?" And that really is what politics in a democracy is about. You may disagree with me. What are the problems? And how do we solve those problems? And that is something that we spend far, far too little discussing. So let me lay out what I believe, and I think many Americans believe, are problems. When we talk about our great country, intrinsic in what we talk about is the understanding that historically, what America is about is fairness, is democracy, is everybody having a fair shot. That's kind of what we mean when we talk about America. That's what we grew up believing, that's what we learned in school. So then we got to lay issues out on the table, and I want you to think about it. Is it fair? Is it appropriate? Is it American that we have more income and wealth inequality than any major country on earth today, and it is worse in America than any time since 1928? Why is that? Why is that? Did some terrible natural disaster hit America? No. In fact, what has happened, as everybody in this room knows, is technology has exploded in the last 20 or 30 years. Most people are producing much more. Worker productivity is going up. All of you are producing more because you have the tools to produce more. If that is true, why does it happen that millions of people today, in inflation adjusted for dollars, are earning significantly less than they did years ago. You want to know why people are angry? The median male worker, that man right in the middle of the economy, is earning $700 less in inflation-adjusted for dollars than that person did 41 years ago. 41 years ago, woman earning $1,000 less in inflation-adjusted for dollars than she did in 2007. Well, maybe we should have some discussions about that issue. Why? What's going on? In terms of wealth distribution, you tell me whether you think America should be the country where the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Is that the America we grew up believing in? Is that the kind of country we think we should live in? 1/10 of 1%? Owning almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%? I know that some of my Republican friends get very nervous when we talk about redistribution of wealth. Well, I want everybody in this room to know there has been a massive redistribution of wealth in the last 30 years. Hasn't been on the front pages of the New York Times, haven't seen it on CBS or ABC. What do you think has gone on in the economy? Trillions of dollars have flown from the middle class to the top 1/10 of 1%, who now own twice the percentage of wealth that they did 30 years ago. Today in America, we have the top 20 people, 20 wealthiest people, owning more wealth than the bottom 50%, 150 million people. Today in America, you got one family, the Walton family of Walmart, owning more wealth than the bottom 40%. And when I talk about our economy, I use a term called a rigged economy. People like Elizabeth Warren and I use that term. What does that mean, a rigged economy? Let me give you one of many examples. Walton family is the wealthiest family in America. They own Walmart. You all know that. It turns out that the Walton family, in my view, is the major recipient of public welfare in America. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the wages they pay their workers are so low that many of their workers, and they, by the way, are now the largest private sector employer in America, that many of their workers are on Medicaid, are on food stamps, or are in subsidized housing, which you are paying for in your taxes. Your taxes go to pay for Medicaid and food stamps and subsidized housing. A rigged economy is when the middle class of this country pays taxes to subsidize the wealthiest family in this country, because the wealthiest family in this country are paying their workers wages and benefits that are too low. That's called a rigged economy. Now that is distribution of wealth. What about distribution of income? What's going on? Now, I come from across the river, but I think the story here in New Hampshire is not any different. Tell me why in the year 2016 so many people in New Hampshire and so many people in Vermont should be working not one job, but 2 jobs, 3 jobs, trying to cobble together some income and some health care. Why is that? Why does that have to be? And the answer is that, of course, wages are too low, and many people are struggling to get some health care in addition. Today we have a federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Now you can do the arithmetic as well as I can, but you can't make it today, not on $7.25, not on $9, not on $10 an hour. An individual cannot make it, and certainly a family cannot make it. And that is why, in my view, we have got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. To my mind, people working 40 hours a week or more should not be living in poverty, and too many of them are. My son used to work at the emergency food shelf in Burlington. And what was true in Burlington and what is true in all over this country, is that people who are working full-time go to the emergency food shelf because the income that they are receiving is not enough to adequately feed their family. That is not what should be going on in America. And let me tell you what else should not be going on in America. We should not have 47 million people living in poverty. We should not have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major nation on earth. About 20% of our kids living in poverty, 36% of African American kids living in poverty. We talk about education, talk about schools. Half of the kids in public schools in America are on free or reduced lunches. Now, I understand that politicians don't talk about poverty. They don't talk about poverty for a couple of reasons. If you're a Republican, what you want to do is cut the programs that the poorest people in this country desperately need. You want to cut nutrition programs when children are going hungry. So that's why you don't talk about poverty. But the other conventional wisdom with regard to poverty is poor people don't vote. What do I have to worry about poor people? I got to worry about rich people going to make campaign contributions. Well, I think that concept stinks. And I think as a nation, we should be embarrassed about having 47 million people living in poverty. And let me talk about something else that doesn't get a whole lot of discussion. And one of the fun things about running for president is that you can sometimes, not always, the media is pretty obstinate about this, but sometimes you can force discussion on issues that are often ignored. Okay, kind of the media looks at the world from here to here, but sometimes with a little bit of luck you can broaden that discussion and get it outside of the soap opera and the baseball game. All right? Unemployment in America. Now, let me give you the good news, and it is very good news, as I think everybody here knows. When President Bush left office, we were losing 800,000 jobs a month. Everybody remembers that, 7 years ago. 800,000 jobs a month, an astronomical number. For those people concerned about deficits, we ran up that year the largest deficit in the history of the United States of America, $1.4 trillion deficit. And obviously everybody remembers that when Bush left office, the world's and our financial system was on the verge of collapse. There are economists who have since told us that there was a real fear that you were going to put your credit card in an ATM machine and nothing was going to come out. That was pretty close. Okay, that's where we were when President Bush left office. Well, today, I think unless you are very, very partisan, and it does astound me how some of my Republican colleagues can go around the country talking about the problems we have, and of course we do have economic problems today, ignoring where we came from in the last 7 years. But when people talk about unemployment, what you see on the front pages of your paper every month is official unemployment, which is now about 5%. I trust that everybody in this room knows that official unemployment is very different than real unemployment. There's another government statistic that comes out at the same time, but does not often get reported, which looks at unemployment not only for those who don't have jobs, but those who are working part-time when they want to work full-time. And that's a lot of people in this country. And those people in high unemployment areas who have given up looking for work. When you add all that together, you got 9.9% unemployment, which is a serious problem. A lot better than it was 7 years ago, but it is a serious problem. And now let me touch on an issue that gets almost no discussion at all. It amazes me, but I keep talking about it, but it does not get much discussion, and that is the issue of youth unemployment. Youth unemployment. We asked some economists a while back to do a study for us, looking at kids who were between 17 and 20 who graduated high school. These were not dropouts. They graduated high school. For these kids, real unemployment, if they were white, was 33%. All right? Kids graduating high school, going out looking for work, 33% were unemployed or underemployed. If they were Latino, 36%. If they were African American, the number was 51%. Now, that is a crisis, but don't you think it's a little bit amazing that nobody talks about this issue, that it doesn't get the kind of coverage that it deserves? I do. I keep talking about it. It doesn't get written much by those guys. But it's a huge issue. And I'll tell you why it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue for two reasons. Number one, thinking back to when we were young, what do young people want? They want to stand on their own 2 feet. They want to get out of the house. They want to earn some money. They want to become independent. And if you're out there looking for a job and there's not a job, that's hard to do. But here is what concerns me even more than what it is doing to kids. There's another issue that doesn't get a whole lot of discussion, and I want you all to think about it. We in the United States today have more people in jail than any other country on earth. We have 2.2 million people in jail. We spend $80 billion a year incarcerating people, the local, state, federal level. How does that happen? Why does it happen? What is the correlation between high youth unemployment and high rates of incarceration? I believe that there is. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, down in Bennington, Vermont, there was a principal there at the high school who was fierce. She almost refused to allow any of her kids to drop out of school. And she hired, she took this very personally, took it very personally, as good educators should. And she hired mentors, and these mentors were there for the kids 24/7. And she said to the kids, if your family is having a dispute, kids do things on the moment. They drop out of school, their parents are having a fight, they don't have any money, whatever it may be. And she said, you call up at 3 o'clock in the morning, that mentor, you are not dropping out of school. We will get you a job. Don't do anything stupid. Stay away from drugs. And she had a very positive impact on the kids. And that's what we have to do nationally. So I think it is when we spend, and even some conservatives are catching on to this point, and actually this is one area where we have seen conservatives and progressives coming together. Who thinks it is a good idea to spend $80 billion a year having more people in jail than China does? Nobody I know. So what we should be doing, to my mind, is doing exactly what that principal in Bennington, Vermont was doing, and that is we should be putting our emphasis and our money into education and jobs for young people, not jails or incarceration. It's going to save us lives, and it's going to save us money. It's a progressive perspective. It is a conservative perspective. And let me talk about, when I talk about jobs, let me talk about what I think we should do and how we should pay for it. One of the arguments against me in this campaign is I'm a really nice guy, I'm Santa Claus, I want to give away a lot of free stuff, but I don't pay for it. Well, we do actually pay for it. We have today a situation where our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our water systems, and I'm not just talking about Flint, Michigan, it's true, varying degrees all over this country, wastewater plants, airports, our rail system, increasingly falling further behind Europe, Japan, even China in some respects, levees, dams. Everybody knows that we need to make a huge investment in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. There is no debate about that. The American Society of Civil Engineers, what a sexy name that is. But these guys are the people who study the issue. And they say we need to make over $3 trillion investment in our infrastructure. It's sitting there, and I can tell you as the former mayor of Burlington, infrastructure does not get better if you don't invest in it. It just doesn't happen. It gets worse. And in fact, you end up having to spend a lot more rebuilding a crumbling infrastructure than you do if you have proper maintenance, which is what the sane approach to that is. So what we are proposing is to spend $1 trillion over a 5-year period to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. And when we do that, we not only make our country more productive, safer, more efficient, but we also create up to 13 million decent paying jobs. Okay? Now, even in Washington, admittedly, $1 trillion is a lot of money. So how do we pay for it? Well, right now, as some of you may know, there is a huge loophole, corporate loophole, which allows large multinational corporations and wealthy individuals to stash their money in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and other tax havens. And what we have documented, and there is no debate about this, that in a given year, you have very profitable multinational corporations not paying a nickel in federal income taxes. And that seems to me to be absurd. We're losing about $100 billion a year just from that one loophole. And that loophole, we will be able to rebuild our infrastructure and create millions of decent paying jobs. Now, getting off economics for a moment into another area, I know here in New Hampshire, for better or for worse, you see a lot of politicians coming through your state. And many of my Republican colleagues talk about family values. Talk about family values. They love families, and that's what they talk about. But everybody in this room knows, and it's, you know, I will not shock anybody here to suggest to you, I know you won't be shocked to suggest that sometimes in politics there's a little bit of hypocrisy. Just a little. Many of my Republican friends go around the country and come into New Hampshire talking about family values. And this is what they mean. So let's be very clear about what they mean. Now, they may talk about it a little bit more in other parts of the country than they do here in New England, but it's important for us to understand what they mean. When they talk about family values, they are saying to every woman in this room, every woman in this state, every woman in this country, that you do not have the right to control your own body. I disagree. When they talk about family values, what they are saying, and what the Republicans in the Senate and the House voted for, is to defund Planned Parenthood, one of the important and excellent organizations in this country providing excellent quality health care to well over 1 million women, many of them low income. When they talk about family values, what they are saying is that to the gay men and women in this country, they do not have the right to be married. And I disagree with that as well. So I happen to think that when you talk about hypocrisy, what you are seeing is Republican candidates running all over the country telling us how much they hate government. Government is the source of all evil, and they're going to help us all out a lot by cutting Social Security and cutting Medicare and cutting Medicaid, maybe doing away with the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Energy, because they really hate government. But somehow, when it comes to a very, very personal decision that a woman has to make, they love government. And they want the state and federal government to make that decision for every woman in America. That is hypocrisy. That is wrong. Jane and I have been married for 27 years, and there's nobody I know who believes more in family than Jane does. We have been blessed with 4 great kids, including one who lives here in New Hampshire with his 3 kids, and we have 7 grandchildren in total. And needless to say, they are beautiful grandchildren. So we believe in family, and we believe in family values. But when I talk about family values, we are raising an issue that up to recently has not gotten a whole lot of discussion. And that is that the United States is the only major country on earth, and in fact, one of the very few countries on earth that does not guarantee paid family and medical leave. Do you all know that? See, one of the things that we have got to overcome, I think, is looking at the status quo and thinking it is normal. and taking a hard look at what goes on around the rest of the world. This is what paid family and medical leave means. It means that today, if you are a woman in New Hampshire or Vermont, and you are giving birth, a momentous day for anybody who's had kids here, but if you are that mom and you are working class or you are a lower income mom, what happens? You give birth today, and maybe a week from now or maybe 2 weeks from now, you are forced to go back to work in order to earn income to take care of your family. So what you are seeing in reality is mothers being forced to separate themselves from their newborn babies. This is the only major country on earth where that occurs. And as I said, one of the very few countries in the entire world, poor countries, make sure that moms can stay home with their babies. And what happens if today you get a phone call that your kid is sick and you need to go home? Are you guaranteed the right to stay home or spend time maybe with your dad who may be dealing with Alzheimer's? In this country, you're not. Only major country that does not allow that. There is legislation now in the House and the Senate, supported strongly by many Democrats and by me, which guarantees paid family and medical leave for 3 months at 2/3 pay with a cap. It will cost the average worker in America an increase in payroll tax of $1.61 a week. I think that that is a good investment, and as president, I will fight to have the United States join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee paid family and medical leave for our working families. When I go around the country, what I find is there is a real anger and a frustration. And there is a deep feeling that the United States government is not hearing the pain or the reality of ordinary Americans. Ordinary Americans having a hard time finding affordable child care, finding a hard time getting decent jobs, having a hard time being able to send their kids to college, having a hard time paying for health care. These are the realities, and people look to Washington, and Washington is living in a very, very different world. And then on top of all of that is the issue of fairness, is the issue of a rigged economy, which essentially means that ordinary people are working longer hours for low wages, when almost all new wealth and income is going to the top 1%. And there is the issue of wealth and power, which dictates what goes on in America. You know, what we are, especially in New England, maybe, you know, we have town meetings, somebody is rich, somebody is poor, but the general feeling is everybody should have a say. You know, should be a little bit of equality here. When people look at Wall Street, what they see is a rigged economy. What they see is a corrupt campaign finance system. And what they see is a broken criminal justice system, all wrapped up in Wall Street, okay? So what happened, as everybody in this room knows, and I can tell you from personal experience, because I was a member of the House Banking Committee, which later became the Financial Committee, representing Vermont. I was on the committee which dealt with the deregulation of Wall Street. And here is the reality of what goes on, which will not shock anybody in this room or any American. Wall Street put billions, that's a B, billions of dollars in lobbying and campaign contributions into saying to Congress, look, get rid of these old 1930s regulations, you know? You got to deregulate us. You got to allow commercial banks to merge with investor banks, to merge with large insurance companies. That's the way we can compete globally. I didn't believe it for 1 second. Not for 1 second. Never made any sense to me. We had Alan Greenspan coming to the House Banking Committee Go to my website, you'll see the dialogue that Greenspan and I had. Turns out I was right, he was wrong. But anyhow, here's the point. Billions of dollars go into lobbying, campaign contributions, and you have not just Republicans, but Democrats. Let's be frank about it for those who are Democrats here. You had, Robert Rubin and Larry Summers and Alan Greenspan and all these guys on the Clinton administration saying, we're going to deregulate Wall Street. Get the government off our backs. Let us go out and do these wonderful things. The creativity of Wall Street. Well, they were deregulated. And they went out and they had the opportunity to do their thing. And what a thing it was. And their thing turned out to be largely fraudulent activity, which drove this country and the world into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Everybody here knows it. Millions of people lost their jobs, their homes, their life savings. Millions of people still have not recovered from that horrendous recession. People have jobs today paying half the wages that they used to have. And when they crashed, they went running to Congress. Remember, these are the guys who hate government. Government is anathema to them. They went running, and I was in the room. I was in the room with Ben Bernanke and Hank Paulson, right in that Senate room, 40 or 50 of us, and they said, if you don't give us $700 billion in a few days, it is likely the world's economy will collapse. We need it. That is like a 3-page outline of what they wanted. $700 billion for the same people who want to cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Bail us out, bail us out. Well, they got bailed out. Today, they got bailed out under the argument, as you all know, that banks were too big to fail, i.e. if the banks went down, they take a good part of the economy with them. That's why they had to be supported. Well, today it turns out that 3 out of the 4 largest banks are bigger than they were when we bailed them out. Turns out today that the 6 largest financial institutions in America have assets of about $10 trillion, equivalent to 58% of the GDP in America. They issue 2/3 of the credit cards and write about 1/3 of the mortgages and control a whole lot of the bank deposits in this country. So for a start, above and beyond the issue of my fear that we'll have to bail them out again, is the impact of a few financial institutions on this country with so much wealth and so much power. That is why I agree with a number of economists who think that we should reestablish 21st century Glass-Steagall legislation and why we should break up the largest financial institutions in this country. What I want to see is a financial system which is not an island unto itself, whose main goal is simply to make as much money as it can for themselves. I want to see banking become boring again.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Remember boring banking?
Hey, guys.
Small business goes to a local bank knows the business person, makes an affordable loan, helps people buy homes. That's the kind of banking I think we need, not a system which is geared to
Yes, I can
allow
hear you.
for the creation of incredibly complicated, esoteric financial tools that nobody understands, that are often fraudulent. Let me tell you a story which I think encompasses why the American people, in one brief story, are
Yes,
so
Chris, I
angry
can hear
at
you.
the solution to the political process. I want you to hear this first. Goldman Sachs, you know, is one of the major financial institutions on Wall Street. A
Yes,
couple of
I can
weeks
hear
ago,
you.
you may have noticed, didn't get a whole lot of
1, 2,
attention
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
Goldman
10.
Sachs became
I can't talk
another
louder than
bank
this, I'm sorry.
to reach a financial settlement with the U.S. government. They agreed to pay a fine of $5 billion. Goldman Sachs, not a lot of money, but for most people,
Yeah.
a sizable chunk of cash. $5 billion. Now, why did they do that? Because obviously they were guilty of selling packages of worthless subprime mortgages. Now, they paid their fine of $5 billion. Now, what about Goldman Sachs? What does this represent? And by the way, not just Goldman Sachs. I'm using them as the latest example. You can go to other ones as well. All of you are familiar with the phenomenon, the concept of revolving door. You all know what revolving door is? What
I can't hear
revolving
you.
door means is that very powerful special interest have people
You want me
go
to talk?
into government to represent their interests.
One,
and when
two,
they finish with
I have no
government,
idea
go
what you're
back
trying to
into
tell
the
me.
private sector. In the last 25 years, Wall Street, Goldman Sachs has given this country 2 secretaries of Treasury, one under the Republican.
Well, if they're going to do that, why don't I
administration,
just
one
get on
under
the phone so that I don't have to stand in this room and talk?
And they have provided dozens of very high-level people in government. That's political power. Think about it. You own a business, and you say to Joe, hey, Joe, I want you to take a
Okay,
few
it's
years
still a little
off,
awkward. If
go
you're just
work
going
in
to take my
government, and
voice,
come
can I
back.
just call on the phone?
That's a lot of power. You have your guy in government, all right? So they pay a $5 billion fine. They have, over the last number of years, had many, many people in the highest places in government. What else?
3377, okay.
Well, they make huge campaign contributions. They have meetings just like this, where what they do is bundle money, or now with super PACs, they can provide huge amounts of financial support to the candidates that they like. That's what they do. And then there's something else that goes on that galls the American people, probably even deeper than the role of money in politics. Goldman Sachs just reached a $5 billion settlement with the United States government for illegal activity. Today, some kid here in New Hampshire or Vermont gets picked up with marijuana. That kid will have a police record for the rest of his life. How many Wall Street executives will have a police record for destroying the lives of so many Americans because of their illegal behavior? $5 billion settlement, no charges made. And that is why the American people are angry. And that is why this is an issue that we have got to deal with. Criminal justice means justice. It means that if you are poor, it means that if you are wealthy and powerful, you need to be treated the same under the laws of the United States of America. And if elected president, I will do my best to make certain that that happens. Now, when we talk about what goes on in our country today, it's not only a rigged economy. People working longer hours for low wages, almost all new income and wealth going to the people on top. It is a corrupt campaign finance system. If you didn't hear me correctly, I said corrupt campaign finance system, which is undermining American democracy. Now, I want you all to think about it. Okay? We may disagree here. Somebody disagrees with me, that's fine. I love democracy. I love debate. But I do not love the situation today in which billionaires can buy elections. As a result of the disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision, billionaires can now spend as much as they want in super PACs or independent expenditures. Many of the TV ads you're watching here in New Hampshire will come from super PACs, from organizations that have weird names, but trust me, are controlled by billionaire families. I want you to think about this. In America today, in this campaign cycle, the Koch brothers, second wealthiest family in America, a family who believes not that we should cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid. It's not what they believe. They think we should eliminate Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. This family, along with a few other billionaires, will be spending at least, in my view, $900 million on this campaign cycle to elect candidates who represent the rich and the powerful. Anybody here think that that is what American democracy is supposed to be about? I don't. I think it is undermining American democracy, and one of the reasons I think our campaign is doing well, and I don't say this boastfully, but we have received, up until this point, 3.5 million individual contributions. That is more individual contributions than any candidate in the history of the United States of America up until this point in a campaign. And I think one of the reasons that we received so many contributions, and by the way, it has blown my mind, never in a million years that I believe this would have happened. One of the reasons is not only because people are sympathetic to my point of view, I think that's true, but there's another point. And people are saying, you know what, Bernie, I don't have a lot of money. I'm just middle class or I'm working class. I'm going to send you an average check of $27. That's our average contribution, because I think it is awful that billionaires are buying elections. $27 is not a whole lot of money, but if it helps you stand up to people who are trying to buy elections, here's my $27, and I appreciate that very much. So what do we have to do? Okay. Well, it's a no-brainer to my mind that when you had a 5-4 Supreme Court decision allowing Citizens United to go forward, I think we have got to overturn Citizens United. So here is a promise that I make to you, and that is that no nominee of mine to the Supreme Court will get that position unless he or she makes it publicly clear, crystal clear, that they will vote to overturn Citizens United. And let me go a little bit further, and maybe it's because some New Englander here. I am a passionate believer in democracy. I really am. And I've run, as some of you know, in Vermont, in a lot of races. Sometimes I lose, sometimes I win. But I've always enjoyed people debating issues, getting involved in the political process, and I've always wanted to see large voter turnouts. And I believe that not only do we have to overturn Citizens United, you know what I think? I think we have to go to public funding of elections. So that if anybody in this room, and I don't care if you're a conservative or a progressive or a moderate, you want to run for office, you should be able to do so without having to beg wealthy people for campaign contributions. Nobody here knows how much time people in Congress spend raising money. I mean, I'm there, so I know it. Democrats go to the DNC room or the Democratic Senate Committee room, Republicans go to their room, and they do what they call dialing for dollars. That's true. They're given a list of potential donors. Neil is shaking his head. Is that correct, Neil? All right, he doesn't want to comment on this. All right. He's objective. But that's what they do. And not only should members who are elected be working for the people, not raising money, if you think you could simply divide your brain in half and say, okay, now I'm working on unemployment or health care, oh, I got to go out and raise money, it impacts your entire being. People are obsessed with raising money. It is getting worse because of Citizens United. So I think we need to move toward public funding of elections. Okay, here's another radical idea, all right, while we're at it. Everybody here knows we need the best educated workforce in the world for our economy and for our democracy. And everybody here, I think, knows that we once did have that. We don't have it today. Today, you have hundreds of thousands of bright, qualified young people who want to get a college education but are unable to do so for one reason, and that is their families lack the money. And you got millions of other people, and this is unbelievable. I mean, I knew about this issue, but I really did not know until I began running for president how significant it was. And this is a huge burden of student debt. Every place I go, every speech that I give, I say to people, tell me, how many of you are dealing with student debt? Whoop, everybody's hands go up. And the numbers that come out, I think last night we did a rally, and a woman jumped up and said, I had $150,000 in debt. Talked to a woman in Burlington, Vermont a couple of years ago, $300,000 in debt for the crime of going to medical school. Saw a kid in Iowa last week, $60,000 in debt after 2 years of college, dropped out. Okay, that's crazy stuff. I mean, if you want to have a well-educated workforce, which everybody does, you should not penalize people because they're trying to get that education. What does that mean? It means, in my view, that when we talk about public education, It is no longer good enough to be talking about first grade through 12th grade. That was a great concept for 100 years. 50 years ago, you had a high school degree, you're doing pretty well. You can go out and get a good job. You had the education you needed to make it in the economy. That is not the case today. Today, in my view, when we talk about public education, it should include free tuition at public colleges and universities. And furthermore, we have got to deal with this issue of student debt. So what I am proposing is to lower student debt by allowing those with the debt to do what they cannot do today. And that is, right now, they are stuck at high interest rates often, and I want them to have the opportunity to refinance those loans at the lowest interest rates available, not be stuck with 8% where you can get interest rates of 3%. That will take a huge bite out of the student debt of millions of people in this country. Now, people say, well, Bernie, that's a nice idea, Santa Claus, and what else do you have for us? Coming down that old chimney, yeah. Okay, how are you going to pay for this one? It's an expensive proposition, $70 billion a year to do what I want to do. And I'll tell you how we'll pay for it. We're going to impose a tax on Wall Street speculation. That's how we're going to do for it. Now, when Wall Street needed a bailout, it came to the middle class. In my view, it is Wall Street's time to help the middle class today. And now I understand why the head of Goldman Sachs the other day thought that I was dangerous. All right, well, it's okay. What about another issue that we need to talk about? And this issue is interesting because it ties up with other issues. I am on the Senate Energy Committee and the Senate Environmental Committee. And I will tell you what I suspect everybody in this room already knows, and that is that climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already doing devastating harm to our country and to the world. And what the scientists tell us, and I think we have got to listen to them, that we got a short window of opportunity to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel. And if we do not do that, the planet that we will be leaving our children and our grandchildren will be increasingly unhealthy. Now, what is interesting about this debate is that the scientific community is virtually unanimous. That's what they say. And in fact, some of the new studies that are coming out are suggesting that they underestimated the severity of the problem. And what they're now saying is that it could be, and I want you to hear this, that by the end of this century, I got 7 grandchildren, at the end of this century, this planet could be 5 to 10 degrees warmer than it is today. That Vermont and New Hampshire will have climates similar to Georgia by the end of this century. And all of you understand what that means. It means more floods, more droughts, more rising sea levels, more acidification of the ocean, and we are in the process of destroying oceans right now. It means more international conflict as people fight over limited natural resources, water, land to grow their crops. That's what we are looking at. Now, that is a tragedy that I, if elected president, will deal with in a very, very bold way. We've got to work with China, we've got to work with India, Russia, countries all over the world. And we're beginning to make some progress, but we have to move much more aggressively. But here's the point that I want to make, which ties up with another point. I want you to think about it. How does it happen, and I gather you've had Republican candidates coming here, right? How does it happen that not one Republican candidate for president will tell you what the entire scientific community is saying? That climate change is real and that it has to be dealt with for future generations. Are the Republican candidates dummies? No. No, I serve on many committees with these guys. We talk about health care, we talk about other issues. We disagree, to be sure. But they don't go around attacking cancer researchers or Alzheimer's researchers. They listen, they ask intelligent questions. How does it happen that on this issue they deny science? And this gets you right back to a corrupt campaign finance system. Because the day that any Republican candidate comes to this podium and says, you know what, I've read the literature, I've talked to the scientists, climate change is real, and we got to do something about it, on that day, they will lose their campaign funding from the Koch brothers, from ExxonMobil, and from the fossil fuel industry. And that is just one example of the corrupting impact that campaign money plays on our public policy. Okay? And that is why we need to overturn the Citizens United and allow elected officials to deal with the real issues facing our country and not have to worry about where they're getting their money from. All right, I've gone on too long, but let me just raise one other issue. What this campaign is trying to do is to ask the American people to think big and not small. Question, which I want you to think about. Why is the United States the only major country on earth that doesn't guarantee health care to all people as a right? Now, I'm a member of the committee that wrote the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act has done a lot of good things. It has ended this obscenity of pre-existing conditions. You all remember pre-existing conditions? 20 years from now, people will not even believe that we allowed that to happen. That if you had breast cancer, they would insure you for everything except what you needed it most. I mean, that's what pre-existing conditions were about. That's gone. We have added some 17 million more Americans into the ranks of the insured. We have done away with discrimination against women who are paying higher premiums for the crime of being a woman. All right? We've dealt with that as well. But we still have 29 million Americans without any health insurance. We still have people in this room and all over this country who are underinsured with large deductibles and copayments. We still pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs, such that 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford the prescriptions their doctors are writing. And yet, despite all of that, we end up spending far, far more per capita on health care than do the people of any other country. I don't know how many of you know this. We are spending almost 3 times per capita more than they do in the UK, guaranteeing health care to all people there, 50% more than the French, and far more than our Canadian neighbors who guarantee health care to all people. Why is that? How does that happen? Why are we the only country on earth that doesn't say, whether you're rich, you're poor, you're young, you're old, whether you're living in California or New Hampshire, guess what? You're an American, you have health care. Okay? Now, I believe in that. I believe that health care is a right of all people and not a privilege. But more importantly, I believe that it's absurd that we are spending so much more per capita on health care than other countries. I think it is absurd that while our people cannot afford prescription drugs, while elderly people are cutting their pills in half because they can't afford to buy medicine, the top 3 drug companies last year made $45 billion in profit, and they could double the price of your medicine tomorrow, and nobody can do anything about it because of the incredible power of the pharmaceutical industry and their campaign contributors and their lobbyists. Bottom line is, I believe that we should move toward a Medicare for all single-payer program. And what that would do, not only guarantee health care to all people as a right, it would save middle-class families thousands of dollars a year on their health care costs. And do you know what else it would do? Which we don't talk about very much. How many millions of people in this country are staying at jobs which they don't want to be at because they get decent health care benefits for their family? Whole lot of people. If we said to those people and to every American, you know what? You could go out economically, you could start your own small business. You're an entrepreneur, you got an idea, go do it. And your family will have health care. You know what that does to the economy? When people are not forced to be at work at jobs they don't want to be in. I think it would be a huge asset to this country. You know what it will mean to small and medium-sized businesses who spend half their lives trying to figure out how they're going to provide health insurance to their employees, getting that off their backs? Doesn't matter whether you're a big corporation or a small business, your worker is going to have health insurance. So I see this as a real boon to our economy, and I think we should move in that direction. So here we are. It's 2016. We live in a wonderful, extraordinary country, but there is so much more that has to be done. And what the theme of my campaign is about is that no president can do it alone. We need the involvement of ordinary people at every level to stand up and help transform this country. So I believe that we should not have the highest rate of childhood poverty when we have more income and wealth inequality, that we should not be the only major country on earth not to have health care for all or not to have paid family and medical leave, when the 20 wealthiest people have more wealth than the bottom half of our people. I think that if we stand together and if we don't allow the Donald Trumps of the world to try to divide us up, there is no limit to what we can accomplish, and that is what this campaign is about, and that is what a Sanders administration will be about. Thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words. Yes.
We want to thank the senator, and he's agreed to take a couple of questions. And if I could just ask the first question, Senator, one of the most pressing issues that many of the residents of New Hampshire are facing is the opiate drug addiction problem. It's not just a New Hampshire problem. As you know, your governor,
That's right.
just a couple of years ago, the state of the state addressed one issue, and that was the drug addiction. It's a national problem. Your response to
Jim,
it?
thanks for raising that. It is it's painful. I just met a woman yesterday whose stepdaughter overdosed. I think here in New Hampshire, you losing one person a day is it roughly?
400 last year.
Yeah, over one person a day. And in Vermont, it's a crisis. So let me just talk about it in several respects. Number one, we're going to have to deal with this on a number of different levels. First of all, I think the pharmaceutical industry is going to have to accept its responsibility about the drugs that it is producing. It goes without saying that nobody wants to, if I have a bad back, I want some alleviation of that pain. But we got to figure out a way
Hey, everybody. So that was totally unexpected. Good morning. We'll have a real newsroom coming up here soon. That was NECN, New England, and it looks like they just decided to stop their feed there, not going to give us the rest of those reporter questions. We will have the real newsroom here about a half hour. Join us. We'll talk about this. We'll talk about the TPP. We'll talk about the new poll that shows that basically it's tied. Sanders within 2 points nationally because, well, when the people actually hear what he has to say, the truth works. The truth is all you need. So we'll talk about that coming up in the newsroom. Join us. Thanks, everybody. Bye.